Thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Capitalist Investor. As always, Mark and Derek. Diamond Hands Derek, right? We're going to stick with that one?
Yeah, I love it.
Diamond Hands Derek. We are going to be talking about rolling joints today with those diamond hands. So the theme of today's show is cannabis on fire.
Yes.
See what I did there?
I did.
Yeah, you like that.
Bro, I got so many jokes you don't even know.
So, obviously, D, with, Biden, winning the presidency, and then with the Democrats taking the Senate in that surprise turn of events in Georgia, it is looking not just more likely that cannabis is federally legalized, but the whole process is accelerating. Right? So I think there's a huge opportunity still for investors in the cannabis space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not talking about like the big big cannabis companies out of Canada. That's kind of a tongue twister there. Tilray, Aurora. You've got Canopy Growth, which is owned by Constellation Brands, or at least a portion of it is. Those companies, they've already had a pretty good run. Where I see the opportunity, D, is really in the U.S.-based cannabis companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean,
sure.
that's where, as soon as everything's federally legalized, these things are going to pop. And I think one of the biggest questions investors have right now is, am I too late?
And I would say absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's, a lot of this that we'll talk about today is kind of predicated on our government and Congress actually doing something that they say they're going to do.
Yep.
Which is a big risk, in my opinion.
That is a huge risk.
But it finally feels kind of like the momentum is finally pushing things in this direction.
Yeah.
I mean, logically, it makes sense. We don't want to get off on too many tangents, but, our legal system is a mess. Our prison system is a mess. Convicting people for nonviolent drug offenders costs a lot of money.
Right. And that's actually a question I'm going to have towards the end of this.
Did I mess you up already?
No. Like, what happens if this is legalized? What happens to those poor people who have marijuana-related felonies and they can't get jobs? So we'll circle back on that, but that's a huge issue.
Absolutely, it's a huge issue. It's just, honestly, it's just wrong. I don't want to get up on my soapbox here, and then we'll circle back to it at the end when you actually wanted to talk about it.
Well, you reminded me. I had no intentions of talking about it, but, I just...
But, it doesn't make sense on a lot of different levels, so maybe we can circle back at the end.
Yep.
But in my opinion, kind of getting back to your question, I think that is really one of the things that's kind of pushing the federal legalization of marijuana in that direction is because it's not just the sale of the product. It's a lot of things kind of culminating and pushing not only liberal Democrats but also kind of more center Republicans who are concerned about budgets still, right?
Yeah.
And
this is tax revenue.
And the states
when it's being sold on the black market, you can't tax it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we've done a show about gambling already, right?
Yeah, same thing.
Right? And
same theme.
Ohio is a perfect example. I think we're landlocked by states that have all legalized betting, and why don't we have it? It's Ohio is just throwing money out the window.
We don't have it because of politics.
Right, absolutely.
If you remember what we talked about on that gambling show, the House and the Senate both approved it in Ohio, but I believe it was maybe the House that said they want it run by the state, whereas the Senate wanted it privately run.
Right.
Well, I think privately run businesses are typically more effective.
Yep.
So... But it's approved.
Right.
Both parties have approved it. They just can't figure out how to approve it.
Right.
So dumb. Same issues here with cannabis.
Right.
So I like where you went with that. I think, D, that when we look at the stock market in general, if you're just investing like in the S&P 500, if you're like an indexed like an indexed fund investor, ETFs, whatever it might be, I think most of the easy money has been made.
Right. I would agree with you.
I think it's going to get more difficult on a going forward basis. It is going to become more of a stock pickers market where you're going to have winners and losers as the economy changes. If you believe that the economy and the world is changing or has changed since, let's say, January of 2020, then you have to believe that there will be winners and losers and that this is a stock pickers market.
Absolutely.
And the cannabis space, whether you've ever smoked weed or not, it doesn't matter.
Right.
We're talking about this from the perspective of making money, right? So, as we're kind of looking at all these cannabis companies, I think the runway is still pretty long ahead of them. This, to me, is an easy money trade. Like, you can still get in now, and there's still a lot of runway.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to get into some of these U.S. companies here. They're basically, even though they're obviously, making money, selling product, it's in its infancy, really.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think you can almost look at this like towards the beginning of companies like Anheuser-Busch, right?
Yeah.
That's where all these numbers are saying that where this is headed.
Yeah.
And while there, has been some money made already on the cannabis trade stocks, that is, it's only just beginning. And if some of this legislation gets passed, man, the floodgates are going to open.
Specifically for the U.S.-based companies.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So let's broadly talk about why we like the U.S.-based companies over the Canadian companies like Aurora,
Tilray.
keep forgetting all their names.
Yep.
You got Canopy Growth, all those guys, right? Those have already seen quite the run. The U.S. stocks, this is where I think there's a good opportunity because obviously the federal legalization is a huge catalyst for them. But the biggest thing I see, D, is that every single one of these cannabis companies, the U.S.-based cannabis companies, they trade over the counter.
Right.
They are not traded on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. They're not traded on an exchange. Because of that, you have fewer potential buyers.
Right.
If I open my crappy little Robinhood app right now, I cannot buy any of the names that we're about to talk about.
Right.
Because you can't buy any OTC names, over-the-counter names. So as we gear towards federal legalization, I think you're going to see an uplisting, is what they call it, right? Where this over-the-counter company all of a sudden now becomes a NASDAQ-traded company.
Yep, absolutely.
And as that happens, more money can flow in, institutional money starts to pour in, and as soon as that uplisting happens, I mean, dude, these stocks could double very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Very quickly.
I mean, we've seen that so many times. The news is now instant, right?
Yeah.
So it happens right away. And if Diamond Hands Derek over here, riding up AMC, you've seen how social media and all these other things can push these companies up quickly.
Yep.
And that you can see it in Tilray. I mean, if anyone's ever looked at the chart for Tilray, I mean, that thing it's a wild ride.
Yep. It is.
I think it was up at 200 at one point. Now it's back down to 30. It was up to, I think, almost $60, maybe $50 3 days ago. So it's a wild ride.
It was up like 50% a couple days ago.
Yep.
Right? I think off of some UK-based news or something like that.
Yeah, they got some contracts to do. It might have been France, I want to say. But anyway, that is on a wild ride because it's one of only few plays that the average Joe can, get into on their phone, right?
Right.
So what happens when, boom, there's all of a sudden 5, 6, 7 U.S. companies listed on a major exchange?
Yeah.
I think that alone right there is going to, really drive up the price based on supply and demand, if nothing else.
So let's get into some of these specific companies.
All right.
So the first one, based on what you just mentioned, that I want to bring up is my favorite company, which is Green Thumb.
Right.
The ticker is GTBIF. They are a multi-state operator. They've got, I believe they operate in 12 states. They've got over 50 retail locations. And without them getting approved for any more licenses, they have the ability to more than double their retail footprint.
Right.
Now, we both believe, and this is why we're doing the show, that they will get more licenses because there will be federal legalization. But even without the federal legalization, it's a great stock to own because they have a pathway to increasing profitability even if it doesn't happen.
Right.
Right? Very, very cool company. But once again, it's an OTC stock, you know? So I've talked about this one on TV before, and I can own it as long as I buy it through TD Ameritrade. But I sure as heck, if I was a Robinhood investor, I can't buy the thing, you know? But the reason I bring these guys up is last week, or when this thing's published 2 weeks ago, they raised an extra $100 million.
Right.
And 100% of that was taken down by one institution. One institution gobbled up the whole $100 million. There's rumors that it was possibly BlackRock. I don't know that that's been confirmed, but that's a pretty legitimate institution.
Yep.
Right? If 100 million was raised and it was all taken down by one firm, imagine the demand there.
Yeah, I can't even calculate it.
Right.
But it's really amazing, honestly.
So I think that shows you the power of what institutional money can do to these companies, as well as the benefits of an uplisting. Now, Green Thumb has not uplisted yet, right? They're still an OTC stock, but you see the institutional demand, and the institutional demand will increase even more when there's an uplisting.
Yep. Well, I think that's a good little segue to talk about a couple numbers that I looked up.
All right.
So the overall sales in the U.S. Last year, 2020, $18.3 billion. That is up 71% from 2019.
Wow.
So I bring this up.
Now, is that because they're 70% more states have legalized it, or is it actually increasing within each state as well? Do you have that in front of you?
That's an interesting question, Mark. I'm glad you asked.
The setup.
So, you know, a lot of that is from newer states getting licenses. But of that increase, existing customers in 2020 bought 33% more product than they did in 2019.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting.
Now, so I did some research for this show on a website called Leafly. Leafly.
Makes sense.
So if I'm not around for the next episode, you guys will all know why. But when I did research this Leafly, I guess it's called. It's one of the best articles that I've seen on any subject. Yeah. It was really thorough, honestly.
They send you a free sample when you read it?
They did not. I don't know if I've been flagged by by the government or anything like that. But I'm trying to. There's a chart that we can throw up here. But when the pandemic started, basically everyone's orders went up by about 25 to 40%.
I believe it.
And people.
Same thing with alcohol consumption.
Yep.
Right?
Over 2,000 people were surveyed. 72% of people said COVID-19 was their reason for buying more, basically.
Wow.
So that's pretty crazy. But that just shows you how much without federal legalization is possible.
Yeah.
You know, just with new states coming on board, even with medical marijuana licenses.
Yep.
I believe that's what it is in Ohio. I think there's only a few states that are approved recreationally.
Yeah.
But even, like you said, without the federal regulation and just states doing it state by state, the potential is just enormous.
Yeah, I agree. Now, while we're on that, I want to hit on something real quick before we start getting back to the different stocks. I was asked this question once before with regards to, obviously, I think the multi-state operators are really the best way to play this. The U.S.-based MSOs, as they're called, multi-state operators. And I was asked this question before on TV. Don't you think that federal legalization will hurt the multi-state operators? Okay. And the answer to that question is no. The reason for that is I believe that if it is federally legalized, it will still be up to the states to dictate how everything happens. It is not going to happen on a federal level, right, where everyone has to do it the same way. They will let the states be independent, but it will be legalized federally.
Right,
right,
absolutely.
Which would still be a huge positive for the MSOs, that's what Green Thumb is. That's why it's one of my favorite plays. I think that's got the highest upside of all the names we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and real quick, in my opinion, one of the biggest federal things that can happen positively for these companies is the removal of Section 208E. Cannabis is still a Tier 1 controlled substance. So I guess that is the reason why all of these businesses basically have to still operate with cash.
Yeah,
and
they can't get financing.
They can't get financing, and they're still taxed on revenue, not EBITDA.
They're taxed on revenue?
Yep, and that is a huge obstacle. I mean, these places are obviously making money hand over fist. But just removing that and allowing them to operate as a normal business.
Wow.
Think of I tried to take a look at calculating that, but it would increase their ability to operate and turn these things into, I don't want to say real businesses because I believe they're real businesses already, but they're not hamstrung by all this regulation, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very important
I did not know that.
point.
That's interesting.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, I know they struggle to get bank financing. It's when something's federally illegal, you can't get financed for it.
Yep. That code was actually put into place to try to get drug dealers additional charges on like money laundering and tax evasion.
Yeah.
So it's like everything else the government does, just old and obsolete, and it needs to be updated. But that's one of the big things that could really help these places out overnight.
Yeah. The only question I have here, and maybe this has been figured out, but if you're at a bar drinking and you're drunk and you hop in your car, it is very easy for someone to know if you're driving under the influence.
Right.
What's the process? I mean, if you smoke weed or eat a gummy or and then you hop in your car and you drive, how do they test for that to ensure that society is safe? Do you know if there's a way to, what are you going to do? You're going to have somebody pee in a cup, or you're going to do a blood test? That could probably be in your system for a week. So how do you know that somebody's under the influence right now? That is the only question I have as to how this really fits into society from a safety standpoint.
Right, absolutely. To be honest with you, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I would assume there's ways of telling, with, flashlights or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know. But yeah.
If they have cotton mouth. Put a little piece of litmus paper in their mouth and see if there's any saliva.
If there's, $35 worth of Taco Bell on their driver's seat, you probably just have to take them to jail. Yeah.
So that's something that I would love to hear more about that. And maybe some of our listeners have information on that. If you do, email us at info@swpconnect.com. I would love to hear about that because that's always been the biggest question I have with regards to how this really fits.
Yep.
Because I don't know if you were with us, but I know Smitty and I, we used to smoke some weed in college before our psychology experiments. Dude, we were locked in different rooms trying to put a puzzle of the United States together.
You couldn't do it?
No, we were just laughing hysterically. So I know there's no way I would have been able to operate a motor vehicle. There's just no freaking way, right? So, all right, let's kind of move back on to some of these companies. So I mentioned Green Thumb. Any that jump out to you?
Yeah, so they all have great names. Curaleaf, I believe.
Yep.
CURLF. I think you mentioned Green Thumb. They're kind of the blue chip stock, I would say.
Yeah.
These guys have the biggest footprint.
Biggest footprint, biggest market cap, most revenues.
Yep.
Yeah. Probably, I think Green Thumb has more upside than Curaleaf, but Curaleaf is they're the biggest in the U.S.
Right. Yep. So, like a lot of these companies, a lot is going to depend on passing all this, different legislation. But
one of the things Curaleaf just recently did is they kind of changed the focus of the company to focus on revenue growth.
Right.
Over profitability. So actually revenue growth at the expense of profitability because their margins are going to be trimmed in doing so. As they announced that, the stock sold off briefly and then fully rebounded and then some.
Right.
And if you think about it, man, the stock market's so crazy. Nobody cares about earnings right now.
No.
All they care about is TAM. And we've talked about this before. Total addressable market. What is the potential for a company? And that's how people are investing. Because Tesla makes no money outside of selling their tax credits. Right? But the company's worth probably $800 billion. So that's how stocks are trading nowadays. I don't think that is going to work forever. I think at some point it gets pretty nasty and investors are going to want to see earnings again. But right now, nobody cares about earnings. So I think it's a good move for them.
That's a great point that I wanted to mention and totally forgot about it. But
you're welcome.
Total addressable market. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think, do you know how many states it's legalized in right now? Is it like 20-ish?
Yeah, I was going to say right around 19.
And some of those 19 or 20 are probably just medical only. Right.
I think most of them are.
All right. So as we kind of, as things get federally legalized and we're at 50 out of 50 states, I think there's huge potential, as you mentioned, like each customer consumed like 33% more last year or something like that. If that was the number, 33% more. I think that continues to go up, right?
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever been to a dispensary?
I have been to one.
Okay.
Yep.
I was at one in California a couple years ago. I went on a retreat with my entrepreneur buddies, and we walked into one, and dude, it's overwhelming. But it's like they're so smart; they know how it all works. I'm in there like I don't know what I'm doing.
Right?
Like, what should I get? Like, what's the difference between sativa and indica? I still don't know to this day. Surprised I came up with those off the top of my head. But it is. I really truly believe that as you see more and more dispensaries and people go, you're going to see increased consumption.
Yep. It's funny. So the one I went to was in Las Vegas.
Okay.
And everyone just kind of wanted to see what it was all about. Since I'm trying to look up how many recreational states there are, but I know it's California,
Colorado,
Nevada. Illinois, I believe, and New York. Is New York? I don't remember. No. So anyway, we checked it out, and in Vegas, it's the cab drivers know everything.
Oh yeah.
So it's like take us to one of these places. We want to see what all the hoopla is about. And he described it as the Costco of marijuana.
Was it big?
And he was correct. Yeah, it was ridiculous. So they had everything under the sun. But it just shows you, like there was a line to get in this place. It was recently passed legislation, but they were printing money.
Yeah,
it was clear they were printing money, and if you just multiply that by another, 35 states, I mean, just think about the potential there. It's crazy.
Yeah. So. I think you'll see increased adoption, and I think you'll see more and more use for each customer as well.
And then one more little point, because before I forget, that chart I was talking about how consumption went up during the beginning of COVID, the number one demographic of all of the demographics that they showed, guess what it was?
That's a good question.
This was per purchase, so like your total spend per transaction.
The demographic, 50-plus-year-olds.
Yep, male baby boomers.
Shut up.
By a lot.
Wow.
Yep. Their average purchase was...
Just based on the way you asked that question, that's why I answered it that way. Otherwise, I would have said like 25 to 35-year-olds,
Yep.
But I figured it had to be a little contrarian. That's impressive.
Male baby boomers. So
Wow.
that's over 55 at least, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yep. So
Something like that.
And it was like it was $120 in last February, and that number went up to like $162
Wow.
per checkout.
Woo. I'll tell you what, you can buy a lot for $162. You really can. Yeah. Like, I was surprised at how affordable. Like, there were seven of us, and we left with this big bag of stuff, and it was like probably right around like $150. Like, we just wanted to, try a gummy or something like that.
Yeah.
Some of us ate 2 instead of just 1. It was fun. I don't know that it's something that I'll be doing on a regular basis, but every once in a while, as long as you're in a safe place.
Yeah, there you go.
One last company I want to mention, D. I think we hit on my 2 favorites so far, which are Curaleaf and Green Thumb. The one I want to mention is not on your list because it's technically not a cannabis company. The name of the company is Turning Point's brand. TPB is the ticker. Think rolling papers. That's what they do, zigzags. So they create the rolling papers. They sell vape pens and stuff like that. So everything they do is already federally legal. It just happens to be the things you need in order for you to smoke the weed. Right? And then they're also very, very heavily interested in M&A opportunities, and there is a lot of belief that they may be acquiring a cannabis company as well.
Right.
Now, Turning Point Brands is the smallest of the 3 we've mentioned. I want to say Green Thumb is about a $7 billion market cap. Curaleaf might be like $11 billion. Turning Point Brands is like $1 billion company.
Right.
It's a small cap company. But I think it's kind of like, it's like maybe a safer, less risky cannabis play alternative for someone who might not want to go and buy an over-the-counter stock. Because this one's already trading, I believe, on the NASDAQ. Because they're not doing anything that's potentially illegal. Right? They're selling rolling papers and vapes. So I think if you are a little more concerned about whether or not it's going to be legalized, the volatility in cannabis stocks, I think this is kind of your easiest way into the space through Turning Point's brand.
Yep. I got a couple of ETFs as well. So the names of these ETFs, I just have to take 20 seconds to talk about them. So MJ is one of them.
Nice.
YOLO is one of them.
YOLO, seriously?
YOLO.
That's awesome.
Toke, TOKE. I mean, and THCX and POTX.
There's no weed? Weed might be the ticker for a company.
Yeah, it is one.
Someone already took that.
I think someone already took that.
Yeah.
But the one that I found that holds a lot of these names that we mentioned was MSOS. So that's a North American cannabis company.
That's the MSOs.
Yep.
Yeah. That's where you want to be.
Yep. So, wrong one there. But Greenleaf, I believe, was their number one holder.
Green Thumb?
Green Thumb,
Yep.
sorry.
I'm sure it is. Great companies. So, I mean, I think just to kind of wrap up, D, these stocks have seen quite the run already with a completely blue presidency, Congress. It's a blue wave, right? So they've already seen quite the run up. But if you're an investor and you're sitting at home saying, am I too late to the party? I think we both would agree that you're not too late. There's still time to get in and make some money in these companies. And honestly, look, would I be investing 50% of my portfolio in cannabis companies? Absolutely not, right? Would I consider putting 3 or 5% into cannabis? Sure. I mean, if it's a respectable position or two in my portfolio, in a diversified portfolio, absolutely. Why not? So I think you just need to kind of watch how much you allocate to it. But I think there's plenty of runway, and I do think there's easy money still to be made. And I can't say that there's easy money to be made in very many other industries and sectors right now.
Yeah. No.
Right?
I mean, everything's expensive. What? The big 5 companies are 25% of the S&P 500 index.
Yep.
A lot of easy money's been made on Amazon, right?
Yeah.
It's these companies, even though it's pretty volatile lately, like I said, is only just the beginning. And even without, if this legislation goes to hell in a handbasket and it doesn't work out, I still believe that there's a lot of room for these companies to grow. And even if it doesn't happen in, the next quarter, I think it will eventually happen.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's a lot of momentum headed that way. And, when can you get in, towards the ground floor of a new industry, It doesn't happen too often. Last time around was probably internet retailers. So
yeah, you're right.
And last thing I'll say, I think it's a long-term play. I think this is going to. I don't think this is going to just double overnight. There'll be some runs up and down, but I think over the next 3 to 5 years, this is a space that I think is very attractive.
I agree. And the last thing I'm going to say before we wrap up is this is also kind of a feel-good trade. And I'm not saying feel-good because you're high. I'm saying feel-good because when I walked into the dispensary that I walked into, it felt like a mom-and-pop shop.
Right.
It felt like a small business. And that's what Green Thumb has, is they've got like 52 retail locations. Right. Now, they own 52 of them. But there's a lot of other companies or families out there that own a farm or they own one retail location. And small businesses have been decimated. And this is, in my opinion, a great way to kind of sort of support those small businesses. Right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
that's exactly what you're looking at. These retail locations that might do, I don't know, maybe $1 million or $2 million a year in revenue. Got to support these guys because they have been crushed throughout the pandemic.
Yep.
All right, man. That wraps up our conversation for today. If you have any questions, shoot us an email, info@swpconnect.com. Check out the show notes. Check out the YouTube channel. Subscribe. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can keep getting you content on a regular basis. Let your friends know how fantastic we are. Give us a 5-star review. Write us a review. Shoot us an email, and we'll send you some swag. As always, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.